Daniel Sports Central, we go over our next team prediction of this offseason, and it's going to be over the Nebraska Cornhuskers. A team that went 4-8 overall in the 2022 season. Another disappointing season for Nebraska. You think back about 5 years or so ago when Scott Frost was hired as the head coach. This team was expected to return to national contention with Scott Frost as the coach, but reality is that couldn't have been further from the truth. He was fired in the early parts of the 2022 season, and it is on to a new era. Matt Rule's the new head coach of the Huskers. Will he return this team to contention, and how will this team be in 2023 in the first year of the Matt Rule era? We'll be talking about it here today. We'll be analyzing this team and predict their schedule game by game in this video. Let's get started with a quick recap of 2022. Once again, this team was 4-8 and started out the season with a disappointing loss. They lost to Northwestern in Ireland 28-31, and that was the one win that Northwestern had in the 2022 season. And so after that loss, there were already fans that were saying fire Scott Frost, but he would still make it a couple more weeks. They'd take on North Dakota the next week, beat them 38-17, but I mean, that was a game that was close for a long time, and it should not have been that close, even though Nebraska pulled away in the end. And then took on Georgia Southern at home in a night game, September 10th. Third game of the season. Georgia Southern, a team that Nebraska had no business losing to. They lost 45-42, and that was the nail in the coffin for Scott Frost. He was fired after that game, and Mickey Joseph was named as the interim head coach. They took on Oklahoma then after that, the very week after losing to Georgia Southern, and they lost the Sooners 49-14. So after that came a much-needed bye week. Took on Indiana at home to start out October, which this was an impressive win. Beat Indiana 35-21, then beat Rutgers on the road 14-13. Took on Purdue on the road after that. Now, this was a close game. Purdue was the eventual winner of the Big Ten West, and Nebraska kept it close. It was a shootout, high-scoring game as well, but Purdue won it by 6, 43-37. So then there was the second bye week, then Illinois came to town. Illinois was a very impressive team in 2022, definitely one of the big surprise teams of the 2022 season, and they took care of Nebraska 26-9. And then the next three games were tough for Nebraska, that's for sure. They took on Minnesota. Now, Nebraska should have beaten Minnesota, and they should have beaten Wisconsin. Both of those games were so close, and Nebraska was in control for the majority of both games. But Minnesota and Wisconsin both came back at the very end to beat the Huskers. So, I mean, you look down the stretch, this team could have beaten Minnesota and Wisconsin for sure. I mean, if you win both those games, which Nebraska should have, this team is at 6-6, and they make a bowl game last season, but that just was not the case. Close losses have haunted the Huskers the past couple of years, that is for sure. But at least for the Huskers, they got a close win against Iowa to finish out the season, 24-17. Finally beat the Hawks for the first time since 2014. So it's been a long time coming for Nebraska. This team finished out the season 4-8, but there is some promise as we look forward to 2023, and let's do that now. Your roster preview heading into the season. Casey Thompson is transferred out. He is headed to Florida Atlantic, so it is now up to, it looks like, Jeff Sims, the Georgia Tech transfer quarterback. And so there's a little bit of question around the quarterback situation for this team. I mean, it looks like Jeff Sims is going to be the primary starter. There's Heinrich Harburg in there as well, who's been on the team for a little while now, and then Chuba Purdy as well, who played a little bit in 2022, but was not impressive when he played. And so we'll see what happens. I'd assume Jeff Sims will be the primary starter from the majority of the season, or at least to start the season. And we'll see if Heinrich Harburg, I think he's the quarterback with the most potential in the Huskers quarterback room. He's got the highest ceiling, but Jeff Sims, I do think, is the answer, as he's got the most experience as of right now. Anthony Grant is coming back as well, the top running back of this team in 2022. That's going to be huge, as he put up over 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns. Trey Palmer is gone. Same with Travis Vokalek, two of the top 3 in receiving for this team last season. Same with Alante Brown, who was the third wideout. Marcus Washington is coming back, who was the second wideout last season, and so the receiving core does lose a few key players. Not going to be quite as deep as it was in 2022, and the backfield does lose A.J. Allen as well, so a couple of players transferring recently, and that was recent too. A.J. Allen transferring out. That's tough for the Huskers there. A.J. Allen definitely showed potential, even though he didn't play a whole lot in 2022. That would have been, I think he would have had plenty of time playing in 2023, but it's now up to Anthony Grant. Looks like he's going to be the primary back for this team, so we're going to see what he can do This team does defensively lose 3 on the D line and 1 in the secondary. So defensively, really not losing too much. There's a couple players transferring out, but defensively, this team, we'll see if they can rebuild, especially on the D line, and keep that strong. But defensively, this team has been generally really good the past couple of years. I mean, they've kept this team in games where, in most cases, I mean, you think back to 2021, this team was offensively, they just couldn't get anything done. And I mean, that was the story for 2022 as well. Offensively, down the stretch, this team really struggled. And of course, injuries did impact that. But we'll see with this team having to rebuild a few positions. It's going to be a challenge for the first year under Matt Rule. And I do think Matt Rule is an outstanding coach. I mean, he's proven that. I mean, you think back to his time at Temple, completely rebuilded that Temple team, which usually Temple is one of the worst teams in their conference. And then, of course, his time at Baylor. Baylor was horrible when he first took over, but only in a couple of years he was able to turn them into a national contender. So Matt Rule is the answer for Nebraska. I think this is exactly what Nebraska needed. I think the future is bright with Matt Rule. Really like him and what Nebraska is doing here, and will this team find success again in 2023? I'm going to be honest, I don't know about 2023, but give it a couple of years. We've seen that with Matt Rule multiple times. I mean, you give it a couple of years, this team should be at least a contender in the Big Ten once again. But looking at the transfer portal and recruiting now, Jeff Sims, mentioned him. Probably the starting quarterback for this team. He is coming in from Georgia Tech. Casey Thompson is off to FAU. Jaquez Yant's off to Florida A&M. A.J. Allen's off to Miami. Eric Gilbert's coming in, tight end from Georgia. Keep an eye on him. He should have an immediate impact on this team. Billy Kemp the fourth. He is definitely a name to keep an eye on, listed as a wide receiver 1 on the depth chart. He also had a key impact in the spring game, so we'll see what he can do. Josh Fleeks is also coming in from Baylor. Ben Scott, offensive tackle, is coming in from Arizona State to add to depth on the offensive line. Jacob Hood is coming in from Georgia. Brant Banks is off to Rice. Elijah Judy's coming in from Texas A&M, defensive lineman. MJ Sherman, expect him to have an immediate impact as well. He's coming in from Georgia. Ernst Hausman, this is a tough loss here. He's off to Michigan. I mean, if this team could have brought back him, this defense it could be even more dangerous, but that is a tough loss. Chief Borders coming in from Florida. Linebacker, defensive back Jaden Gould is off to Syracuse, and Corey Collier is coming in from Florida. Recruiting-wise, this team is 24th in the country, 5th in the Big Ten. 4 4-stars coming in, 24 3-stars. You consider where this team has been the past 5 years, just horrible. Haven't made it to a bowl game since 2016. I mean, all things considered, this team being ranked 24th in the country, I mean, there is promise here in Nebraska. I mean, this is a team that has got the resources to be great. You look at, I'll mention this about Matt Rule too. You think back to Temple and Baylor. Those are two teams that are not big blue bloods, you could say, like Nebraska is. Nebraska's got all the resources. This is a prominent college football program, maybe not in the past few years, but they have been. They've got all the resources to be great. It's going to be, I mean, you would think it's going to be even easier for Matt Rule to turn around Nebraska than, say, Baylor and especially Temple. I mean, Temple is a team that they've never been good, and Matt Rule is able to turn them into a contender in the conference. So Nebraska, I've got this team at an 8 out of 10 on the future forecast meter. I think the future is great for this team. I mean, I think I am cautiously optimistic just because obviously Scott Frost, no one thought he was going to fail, and he definitely did. But Matt Rule, I'm much more confident in Matt Rule. I think he's a much more experienced head coach and definitely a more proven coach than Scott Frost ever was. But that said, let's look at the schedule as we look forward to 2023. So you got Minnesota on the road to kick off the season on a Thursday night, and then Colorado on the road after that. So you got 2 road games to kick off the season, which is probably not ideal, but I'll say this. Both games are definitely winnable. If you can win both of those, you're in really good shape, as you've got Northern Illinois and then Louisiana Tech after that, both home games to follow. Then Michigan comes to town, a huge game there on September 30th. Michigan, expect them to once again be a big contender nationally in 2023. They've got a lot of their key players coming back. You got them at home, so you could maybe think there could be an upset there, but Michigan's going to be tough. And then Illinois on the road to start out October, and then Northwestern at home after the bye week. Purdue comes to town after that. Then Michigan State on the road, Maryland at home, Wisconsin on the road, and then Iowa at home to finish out the regular season. So you look at the first 8 games, all of the first 8 games are very winnable, I'd say, except for the Michigan one. The Michigan one's going to be tough, but I mean, in a world where Nebraska could be great in 2023. I think 7-1 is definitely a possibility in the first 8 games, just considering how winnable these are. But looking at the first 4 games, Minnesota on the road, this is a game where, I mean, I really could go either way here. I think Nebraska is definitely the more talented team. I mean, they're dealing with a few losses offensively. They're going to be atrocious in 2023. Defensively, they could be okay, but they don't have Mo Ibrahim anymore, which he ran this offense in 2022, and this offense was terrible. So for Minnesota, I mean, that's a very winnable game. Nebraska should win it, but based on previous years, Nebraska oftentimes loses games that they should win. But Minnesota, I do think the Huskers win that one, but a close game where I think Minnesota is going to be dealing with too much inexperience to get the win, and Nebraska is just more talented. And then you go to Boulder the next week. Now, Colorado, I don't know about this team. Deion Sanders has brought a lot of hype to Colorado, but the talent on that team is very low level for a Power 5 team, and I've got a lot of uncertainty about Colorado. I think Nebraska could win that game big, but I do think it's going to be close in the end. I think Nebraska is able to get the win, but maybe a closer game than maybe it should be based on the talent of both sides. It's also a road game, so you never know. But I do think Nebraska starts out the season 4-0. Northern Illinois, Louisiana Tech, both very winnable games. I think Nebraska gets it done in both, wins both by at least a couple of touchdowns. And so for Nebraska, 4-0 is where I've got this team heading into the Michigan game, which could turn out to be a ranked-on-ranked matchup. Wouldn't be surprised with Michigan being as solid as they are. And I do think Michigan wins that game in the end. They're just too good of a team. I mean, that's a team that has been in the college football playoff 2 straight years, won the Big Ten 2 straight years, and they got J.J. McCarthy coming back. That's going to be a solid team once again in 2023. I think Michigan wins that game, and just a matter of how close it's going to be, I don't know. I mean, maybe Nebraska hangs in there for a while, but I definitely am going to take Michigan there. And then Illinois on the road. This is a very winnable game. I mean, Illinois was 8-4 in 2022. I mean, who would have thought they were going to be 8-4 just based on the way the talent was looking heading into 2022. But Brett Bielema is the coach, and Brett Bielema knows how to coach in the Big Ten. And Illinois, I don't know if they'll be quite as good in 2023 just because of a few of their players, especially on defense, that they're losing, and offensively, they could be pretty terrible. So I think it's winnable for Nebraska, but being on the road after a tough Michigan loss, I do want to favor the Illini there. So you come back then after your bye week, you beat Northwestern pretty easily. I think Northwestern's still going to be terrible in 2023, and then Purdue, I do think Purdue falls off as well. No more Aiden O'Connell. He's finally out of there. And Purdue, I do think, they could be okay, maybe get to a bowl game, but that's really the ceiling for Purdue just based on that team is going to be very inexperienced once again in 2023. So I've got you 6-2 heading into November, bowl eligible and everything. And November is a challenging month. Michigan State on the road. I do want to favor Michigan State there. I mean, once again, that's a winnable game for Nebraska based on the talent. Same with the Maryland game and even the Wisconsin game. But I do think Nebraska drops their first 3 games of November. Maryland is definitely a winnable game, but I do think the Terps could be a solid 8 or 9 win team in 2023. So I'm going to favor Maryland there to get a close win. And then Wisconsin on the road. I mean, Nebraska just has not won in Madison, and Wisconsin, I do think, is probably my favorite in the Big Ten West this upcoming season, and what could be just a brutal division once again. I mean, who knows who's going to win the Big Ten West? It could be 5 different teams, kind of similar to how it was in 2022 and really the past couple of years. And then Iowa comes to town on the 24th on Black Friday to finish out the regular season. Nebraska beat them last season. I don't see any reason why Nebraska can't do it again. Iowa should be, I think they'll be slightly better in 2023. Cade McNamara, they could be an 8 or 9 win team in 2023, but Nebraska got them at home. I do think the Huskers defense gets it done, and they win that one. And the final record of the regular season is 7-5 for Nebraska. I don't think this team wins the Big Ten West. I think this team finally gets to a bowl game in 2023. I think Matt Rule is going to be able to get at least that done, but I am cautiously optimistic about Nebraska. I think the ceiling is 9-3 for this team. That's the best possible record this team could have. The worst is 4-8. The floor is going to be pretty low for Nebraska, and the range is going to be pretty wide considering this team hasn't been to a bowl since 2016. But I do think, based on the talent, I mean, this is a team. You got Matt Rule, who's an excellent head coach. I think this team is able to get it done, get up to 7-5, and if this team can get to 6 or 7 wins, I think the future looks really good for this team to potentially be a Big Ten contender, maybe even in 2024 or 25. So, but I do think, yes, 7-5, definitely within reason. I'll say this too: I think you lose to either Maryland or Iowa, but you won't lose both games. I think you win one of those, and you're going to have a few road losses. In this case, I've got Illinois, Michigan State, and Wisconsin as those games. But in the end, going to be an interesting season. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below on Nebraska, and I appreciate you guys watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.